Ready for me?
Alright, cool.
You did put it on.
Now, 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. Share. Alright, so you're all set.
You ready for me?
I'm all set.
Okay, everybody, can I have your attention? Thank you. Everyone meet Nate Miller. Nate grew up in Rockingham County. He went to Eastern Mennonite High School in Harrisonburg. He went to Bridgewater College. He studied in art with a concentration of environmental science. He got a master's in Clemson in landscape architecture. He worked in ISTAT at JMU in the science department. Here are some of his passion projects: going out in nature, looking for rare plants, gardening, nature, art, photography, and travel. He makes his own art. He is an author. He brought his book along, and he works as a horticultural professor at PVCC. He works at Messer Landscapes in Stanton, and he also works for himself. Everyone, welcome Nate.
All right, hopefully that everybody can hear me. Let me pull that away from a little bit. A little bit of an echo in here, but we'll make it do. As long as you can hear me, that's the biggest important thing. And I think everybody can hear me. Well, thank you all for having me. I am really excited to be here. I've been planning for this for quite a while. Actually, Sean Jajarnik from Virginia Tech and I were talking about doing this back when I was at the Virginia Biological Farm Association meeting over there at Hotel Roanoke. I don't know, has anybody been to that? Oh, you have to go. If you're into like sustainable farming or even gardening, this is a very wonderful conference. There's all sorts of things to listen to about everything from growing your own cut flowers. I'm trying to actually do a presentation on cannabis because I'm Virginia's first cannabis professor. So that's something. In addition to being a sustainable landscaper and a horticulture professor, that sort of started a whole story in and of itself, and I can give you a little brief story on that as well today. But yes. So if you do have the opportunity in January, it is an annual event. So even if you miss it this year, it'll be around next year at the Hotel Roanoke, the Virginia Biological Association Barn, and have a conference there. I will be there this year. Even if I don't, my class isn't picked this year. I will be selling my book there because Stone Soup Books out of Waynesboro, who sells my book, which I'll hold the book up right here. Beautiful cover. A friend of mine did the cover art. Even though I'm an artist, I wanted to give him an opportunity to showcase his talents. Well, it's a watercolor actually of many plants in a rain barrel. Anyway, I'll be presenting my book there and filling it with 32 books. So I'll be there anyway next January.
January what?
Yes.
What date?
What was that?
What date is that?
Oh, what day? You'll have to go online. I'm not sure, but it should be about mid-January of 2026. Anyway, so tonight what I'm going to do is talk a little about myself, my style of landscape design or theory, and also my book. And we will go through this PowerPoint and you will see examples of my work that's actually built, and some of the projects I've done, and a little bit about my history. So we're going to take this first picture right here, kind of my philosophy a little bit in a nutshell. In this picture, what do you see? What types of plants do you see?
Japanese maple?
Yes, Japanese maples in the background. So the blue one in the front, that's the garden sage, like we all plant in our herb garden. I know the purple ones in the back near the water fountain. You may have seen that in people's gardens. That is a Armenian cranesbill. The cultivar is called Johnson's Blue, even though it's not really to me. And most people look at that, it's not really much of a blue, it's more of a purple to me. But that's what that plant is. And behind it, there are some native wildflowers that are just coming into bud back there. I believe it's some goldenrod, some asters. And I think there's some lavender also in the background that you can't quite see, but it's that green area there. You see this green plant that looks kind of like a weed here with some ferny looking leaves. That's a Turk's cap lily. So you've got a mixture of ornamental plants, native plants, and of course the herbs, they're edible. So that's kind of my philosophy on landscaping is combining those three elements in the landscape, along with sustainable methods, which I'll talk about later. Sustainable methods in my mind is adding everything from chicken coops to solar panels. Next slide. So that leads us to the eons theory. So this is my theory of landscape design I developed in 2012 with my co-author, Genesis Johnson. EONS is an acronym for several different things in sustainable landscaping I think are important to combine in a landscape design. E stands for edible. And when I mean edible, I mean it could be anything from lettuce to tomatoes to peaches, even native plants like our American hazelnut, the pawpaw tree, American persimmon. These are plants that all have edible aspects to them. Next is O. O is ornamental. When I think of ornamental, I think of those heirloom plants that our grandparents had or pass along plants that people pass on to other people. I'm thinking about irises, camellias, daffodils, certain types of lilies. Those are the types of plants I think of when I think of ornamental. But we're not planting things like English ivy and Bradford pears and things that can get out and get into the wild and disrupt our native ecosystems. So that's kind of where I put the brakes on planting those types of what we would consider ornamental plants, including things like Nandina, because we know that they have problems. So, and I'm a big proponent of ornamental, whether they're vegetable or flowers. So an heirloom vegetable, heirloom flowers, I like keeping those old lines still going in the landscape and in the gardens. So what is N? N is probably a little bit of controversy. That's native. And of course, the more you the more you learn about native plants, the more you know that people have different definitions as to what is native. So what is Nate's definition of what is native? I tend to think of what plants are growing around me within roughly 100 miles of me, and also taking into account what type of ecosystem I'm in, whether I'm at a river, a pond, a cliffside, a shale barren, or if I'm in an open area that's good for a meadow. So I'm thinking about the landscape immediately around me, and also when I'm out in the woods and out in the fields, I'm looking at the native plants that are known plants that have been there since before settlement and pioneer times. Pretty much the plants that were there during the Native Americans time frame. So that's what I think of when I think of native. And S. S stands for sustainable methods. And like I was saying, sort of a catch-all for everything in the bathtub sort of thing. Everything from drip irrigation to solar panels, chicken coops, honeybees, everything else that would be an aspect to creating a sustainable landscape. So that is the eons theory. And you can see here in the book, I even added a little bit of a nice little graphic to kind of get your mind wrapped around what those terms mean with each of the letters. Next slide, please.
1 second.
Oh, sorry, back up a bit. So this picture here, I want to just touch on that briefly. That's in the JMU Arboretum, where I was able to redo the Arboretum a little bit when I was working there. So there's the eons theory in action. You have rhubarb in the front. There's your edible. The daffodils are ornamental. They're heirloom too. There's your ornamental. The native is the tree without the leaves on it right now, but that's actually a witch hazel, so it's about ready to bloom. That's a vernal witch hazel. And now we can go on. It's a little bit about my background, Genesis background. So my background is I came into landscape architecture through a couple projects in Bridgewater College I was working on as already an art student and already as an environmental concentration person as well. The two projects you see here that are drawn are two projects for World Trade Center here and the Flight 93 Memorial. So in the early 2000s, there were two open design competitions for both 9/11 memorials, and I put in a project for both of them. The one for the World Trade Center, I actually worked with a local architect because he had AutoCAD, which is a program that architects use to do really detailed designs. The other one I did completely by hand. I like doing a lot with my hand, but I also can work with the computers as well. So those two projects actually sort of set my mind thinking, I wonder if landscape architecture is sort of my calling. Because those two, I hadn't done anything, but I did some landscape planting in my own gardens and help my mother plant things and say, okay, plant these things here and let's put this tree and 5 bushes around it, rule of odd numbers, things I've learned from art. And I was thinking about that also in my own backyard with my vegetable garden with my dad and flower gardens with my mom. Had my own native plant garden long before people were even thinking about doing that. This would have been 1996 is when I first started doing native plants in the landscape. And in a town like Bridgewater, little town, most people have your perfect little flower gardens and the nicely clipped hedges. There's around the corner, when you go by our house, there's this giant native plant garden with all these quote unquote weeds that are in it, but it was all native plants to our area. Actually, a lot of people stopped and got pictures, and I even had people thinking it was part of a park. They were taking selfies long before selfies were a thing, and they thought it was a park. And I said, no, 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 that's our yard, but that's okay. Just let us know. That's Genesis's house right here in South Carolina. She and I went to Clemson together, and that's how we started the book, and that's how we met each other. And she and I actually worked on her house, and her house is in the book as one of the projects. So for a whole summer and spring, and even into the fall before school started, in earnest, we were working on her landscape together. And she herself here has come from a farm in central South Carolina, a town called Gilbert, which is outside of Columbia. She did a lot of fruits and vegetables with her parents as well. Next slide. So a little rundown about my background, and it's pretty complicated. I didn't have the straight and narrow path like the rest of my siblings did, and most of my siblings did the whole law or medicine routes. I started out in art school and thinking I was going to be an artist. But then came to the realization that, oh boy, artists don't make a lot of money and there's not a lot of demand. And that's a lot of people do that kind of on their side. So I need a career, an actual career. So I was thinking about environmental science because I'm really good at science. But unfortunately, I have a learning disability in math, so I failed chemistry. And I was like, oh no, I did great in all the other sciences because the observable sciences, whether it was forestry or wildlife management or uh, plants and botany or entomology, all those are visual things and I can learn because even if there's numbers involved, it's with something tangible, something you can touch and see. You can look at that bird and count all the feathers on the bird or the petals on the flower. And even with the cell biology, you could get that microscope out. And I was actually taking before the test, I would actually take my digital camera and take pictures and come up with printed slideshows for myself of all the phases of the cell so I could memorize them. So I did all the sciences, but I didn't do well in the mathy department. So I was trying to figure out what to do with that. And that's how, another reason why landscape architecture came up. So I grew up, that's Massanutten Mountain. I grew up on the mountain. Some of you know that's where the ski resort is. And steeped in nature. But in the eighties, when I was growing up, there was hardly any development. There was development, but it was not to the expanse it was in the nineties and later on. And up there, I go out my door and see deer and bear and mushrooms and luna moths and walking sticks, and it was just right there. Everything in nature's there. And so growing up, I'd ask my parents, what is this? What is that? What is this? What is that? And of course, they would know to an extent what the animals and plants were. But then you get to that point where the parents are like, okay, I'm out of my range of knowledge. What are we going to do? Because he's asking all these questions, he's very curious. I'm still curious to this day. And so that's when we went to the library. That's when we got books. Dad got all the Roger Troy Peterson guides, and we started looking at things as we were doing our walks or going around. My grandparents lived on a farm in Bridgewater, so same thing there. Get out the field guides, we're out looking around the farm. So that's how I got a lot of my knowledge, was very early on as a child. And I just sort of expanded on that as I went through all my schooling. So that's my town right there. That's about March, February. You can see the Allegheny Mountains in the background, snow, and that's Bridgewater College in the front. And that's where I went there for 5 years. After that, I went to Clemson. Here's Eastern Mennonite High School. I'm not a Mennonite. I went to Mennonite High School. It's actually a Methodist, so it was kind of odd being Methodist in a Mennonite school. But the reason why my parents chose that school was smaller class sizes and individualized attention for my learning disability. And then later went to Clemson, of course, got my master's degree, went to so many football games there. I'm actually planning on going to one probably this fall. They were a lot of fun, much different than Bridgewater, bigger college, a lot more people to visit with, meet, and a lot of clubs to go and join environmental clubs. Also like cars. So I'm one of those strange people that I'm a motorhead, but also a nature guy. So it's a very unique sort of, cross of different things that sometimes you think you'd be oil and water, but it can be. But at the same time, most of the people I know that have race cars aren't driving those every day, so they're not polluting every day with their race cars. So, and they're actually coming to me saying we want a native plant garden. So it works out. Later on, I worked at JMU and at PVCC, where I currently work. I work at the continuing ed department at JMU, and I also work as a horticulture professor at PVCC, where I've been there for about 12 or 15 years, depending on the school. And I've been teaching a variety of classes: agritourism, nature, edible landscaping, and now cannabis. And so 3 years ago, I was given the opportunity to teach a cannabis class, so I tailored it for Virginia. Because I was like, well, anybody can make up a cannabis class, but I want to tailor it to Virginia because I'm in workforce department. So I'm trying to get these students jobs. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, Charlottesville, what are the businesses? I made, relationships to businesses, and I said, let's bring the students in, they can do behind the scenes tours, maybe you get an employee. So that's been its own sort of track. And I'm actually now growing my own hemp field on our family farm. So that's been interesting. There's a whole story you can ask me about that. Okay.
Take one step to your left.
Oh, can you not see me?
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, and at JMU, I worked at Renewable Energy. It's one thing I did for a little bit, talking about solar panels and wind turbines and their benefits, and taking people up to the Dominion Powers project up in Mount Storm. Next slide. So I'm going to go through the contents of the book. And when you open this book, what's in it, you have an introduction, Then I talk about the history of landscape architecture. And I have the fundamentals of design. A lot of people come to me and they don't know how to design, or they say I'm confused, or I can't draw, or I have no idea what I'm doing. I need a plan. And so we often have sessions in class where I will teach them how to draw roughly. And I'm not picky about, if they can't draw a complete circle or color in the lines or anything. I said, just as long as you have something that represents that plant that you're trying to put in the landscape, and you have a sense of scale, that's what matters. The biggest thing is, do you have a sense of scale? Because you don't want that tree going right into the side of your house. And if you see landscapes, you see the messes where people plant shrubs that are too close, or trees that are too big and things like that, or let's say they drop branches and limbs on your car. So what we want to do is avoid all those problems in the future by planning ahead and doing some planning to begin with. And good design is important for that. And then I'll show you a couple of ideas of my projects and my projects in the planning process, as well as that are actually being built. So next slide. So in my introduction, the big project we did in horticulture class at Clemson was for this family in South Carolina. We call it the backyard bilo. Does anybody know ever heard of a bilo, or what a bilo is? Okay, nobody's heard of it. I'll explain. I knew I would, because it's actually a grocery store. It's a small chain, kind of like Piggly Wiggly. Um, Bilo is on only like 3 states in the South, like Georgia, the Carolinas, basically. But we thought it had a great ring to it, because what our objective was to see if this family could grow as much as they could on their property for food, and including with chickens and bees and all that as well. And this was right after and during the recession. And so people were really thinking about, going back to the 30s and the Great Depression and learning from that, and canning, and a lot of people were taking those courses, and they're getting really popular. So we were kind of taking a thread from that, we could see, and actually doing a design for this couple that came to the horticulture class asking for ideas. So that's exactly what we did. And I like drawing landscapes with themes, or gardens with themes. So this wagon wheel design here, each little compartment of that garden has a theme. You've got like a tea garden, an okra garden, you've got a Italian garden, an herb garden, and I think it makes the garden a more whimsical and more interesting, and also tailored to the family, because they like to do like Italian cooking, or they were interested in making their own tea. So having little gardens just for that, they really appreciated that, and they thought it was fun. And we did too, because it's the whimsy of the design. And that's the actual area of the house and their garage and their outbuilding. A large blank canvas to work with. So this is looking down on the garden, as I was talking about. And that's actually a digital rendering of what we thought it could look like, included with a greenhouse and a chicken coop. Next slide. So I want to briefly just go through this. Our book is focusing on the southeastern United States as a region. We did a lot of extensive discussion in the introduction about what is the Southeast, what does it mean, and what states are we talking about, and also things like population density, and also things like what is the region, the different ecosystems and things. So that's something thought was important to put in the book. And also what are significant flowers like the southern magnolia. The next slide. So in our book on the historical roots of landscape architecture, there aren't a lot of books out there that describe American landscape architecture. Like just one book that sort of goes through the whole, from the Native Americans all the way to present day. So we thought that was very important to put in the book. So what we did was we did a very brief synopsis of all the landscaping and gardening designs from the Native American period all the way up to now, to kind of get you an idea of where we were and where we're going from. And also, where did some of these design elements come from? Because a lot of people wonder, like, where did the idea of the kitchen garden come from? Where did the potager garden come? We know it's French, but where in France, and, who thought about bringing it to the United States? So we briefly kind of touch on that. And also, just, it shows you, how our designs have changed over time. The vegetable gardens often would extend around the house. You have a kitchen garden in the front, but in modern days, we put that vegetable garden in the backyard. And now we're trying to put it back up in the front again. Of course, HOAs aren't liking that now. You see every now and then an article saying how somebody put a tomato plants and somebody pitched a fit in the HOA. But we're trying to change that too, and that's hopefully what I'm doing with my book, is changing that idea of, yes, you can put those tomatoes in the front yard. There is historical precedence for this. It also looks good too if you do it in a right design. And I highly bring in things from European design, because we do have a history of borrowing from Europe. I also trace some things from the Native Americans in my design work, and also a lot of modern environmental movements as well. Next slide. Oh, and the Great Depression too. So in our fundamentals of design, I think about things like color, having a color wheel. And the way I think about design for the outside, I kind of think of, I'm an exterior designer. We all know what an interior designer, that's where we are here, the wallpaper, the windows, and the colors of the carpets, the tile on the floor. I think about that, but in an outdoor setting, the chairs, the tables, the patios, the hardscapes, the walls, fences, that's one element. That's all hardscapes. The softscapes, your bed lines, your, plant material, the size of the plant material, the feel of the plant material, and everything else. Also, color, of course, as we know, is incredibly important in the landscape. And I am very, very keen on focusing on seasonal interests, as I know a lot of you probably think about that too. And you can see here on the bottom, having something to look at every season, whether it's the middle of the winter here on the far right, I meant far left because I'm over here, yeah, the far left, or in the beginning with the trillium you see there in the far right. There's always something you can put in your landscape, no matter what time of the year, that will look interesting. It's just a matter of thinking, when do things bloom? When do things fruit? When do the fall colors come on? And when do you have bare branches? And what do the bare branches look like? I also think about things like pairing things together. One pairing for winter I like to do is red twig dogwood as a backdrop with really bright green kale in the front. Sets it off like dramatic sense of interest in an otherwise boring gray and brown time of the year. And also it's giving you something edible that can deal with the frosts and the freeze. Also planning, thinking about, some of these terms we hear like composition, repetition, alignment, hierarchy. I go into detail about that here because as an artist, I know and see these things, but what I want to try to do is convey that to you. What do those terms, when you come across them, mean? What does hierarchy mean? What does simplicity mean? And I try to break it down into something like that visual chart right there. Very easy to see, and then you can see the word, and then, oh, that's what simplicity means. That's what the rule of odd numbers means. Next slide. So this is an example of Zone 7 in Charlottesville using my design theory in a spiral garden. Has anybody heard of a spiral garden or seen a spiral garden? Yeah, some people have. What it basically is you have these stones or some sort of built material in a spiral like a snail shell. Up on the top is your driest plant. At the bottom is your wettest plant. Sometimes there's even a pond there. But in this spiral garden, look at all the different plants you can have in just a simple spiral garden. Quite a lot, isn't it? And I make sure that there's always some element of that Eon's theory in there. There's some edible plants, some ornamental plants, and native plants all mixed in there. So you have the seasonal interest. You have something edible, most of the times of the year. You have something native that's there benefiting the pollinators and bringing in the birds. And then at the bottom, of course, we have our sustainable methods. What were the sustainable methods in that? Well, for this spiral garden, companion planting, putting plants together that work together, that also get rid of some of the insect pests. Biochar is basically like charcoal, in the simplest way of explaining it, and putting it into your garden as a fertilizer. Bird houses nearby, we bring in beneficial birds, and a compost bin, so when you're trimming everything, you've got something to put in your compost. Green manure and also dry manure. Next slide. So I'm gonna show you a couple example projects here. Here's a little snippet of a garden. You can see how I'm trying to think about seasonal interest and that idea of different colors working together. Remember the color wheel. So I'm out there with my color wheel thinking, what could go with that artichoke with that silvery green foliage? I tried the California poppy. I know that's not native, but it's a great annual plant. It does bring in pollinators though. And then in front of it, you have that really neat looking Spanish lavender. The lavender that has the two little petals that go out at the top. So really neat architectural plants. And in the back, we have some sage for the hummingbirds back there. And I think that's the Brazilian sage. Kind of frost sensitive here. You treat it as an annual. And there's some native plants mixed in there that haven't quite come up just yet. Next slide. So back home in Bridgewater, I developed what is called a moon garden. This is really neat. So all the plants in this garden are set attuned to the moonlight. And also when you have nighttime, what color kind of shows up, particularly in twilight? White. It sort of acts like a beacon. And a beacon for visual sense, but also for certain pollinators. Do you all know what pollinators are most active in the twilight and evening for Virginia? Moths, yeah. So a lot of these flowering plants in here are good for moth, the sphinx moths, the hawk moths. Those love things like the white phlox and the white obedient plants, which you see there. And then in the backdrop you see white Culver's root. That's our native. We see that in a lot of wet areas here. And then there are white fruits and vegetables, eggplants, tomatoes, and then there's even a white strawberry. And in the wintertime, when there's nothing really to look at, the sycamore tree has some great white bark. So and it's very architectural and the site, and very tall, very uplifting. So that makes a great backdrop to a moon garden. And so unique way, and the other thing about the moon garden is if you're working all day and you don't have time to go to the garden, and let's say you finally have time in the evening and night to enjoy it, that's a great time to enjoy a landscape that otherwise you don't have time for because you're working all day and people working shifts. So that was another idea going into this moon garden. Was thinking about beyond just making a moon garden was what person would enjoy this, and that would be the type of person that would enjoy this. And especially in hot days like we've had, a lot of us are enjoying our gardens way in the evening or way in the morning because it's just too darn hot to be outside. Next slide. Has anybody heard about hugelkultur? Yeah. So hill garden is what it means in German. You're basically, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. So we did a project in Harrisonburg with a group, and we built this hugelkultur. And as you can see, these are the processes of putting the debris, the branches, the stems, and all the logs and things into this hill. And then, of course, planting on top of it. Once the plants are mature, you can hardly tell that is a hill. And eventually what happens is it does break down, and eventually the hugelkultur, depending on how much stuff we put into it, will eventually go back into the soil. But you have a garden, any stick garden, once that hugelkultur has decreased. Next slide. So I do like to have fun. And another, again, the whole idea of whimsy. So for a church in Martinsville, Virginia, I decided to go with a pizza garden. We talked with like the youth group, like, what do you want on your pizza? And what would be kind of neat to put in the pizza? And some people said, let's put corn on the pizza. I said, okay, well, we can put corn on the pizza. Obviously we had all the standards, the tomatoes, the basil and onions and things, but we wanted to do it not just in a typical garden square. We thought about, wouldn't it be fun to do it actually in like a pizza shape, like a wheel? And actually that makes it easier to walk through, because the way this pizza garden is designed in a wheel is you've got like a cross, like so a pathway going and across through the wheel. So you can easily get up and then back through and tend to weeds or put out a hose, whatever you need to do. So it's easier to actually maintain it. And we had companion planting. There's your companion planting right there. The marigolds next to the tomatoes. Next slide. So here's a couple other projects I've done. This is a native meadow I have done. There are some Midwestern plants in there. I added a few because the client liked cut flowers. So adding purple coneflower and gray-headed coneflower in there was kind of my idea to kind of appease to her need for doing cut flower arrangements. But there are natives to us like black-eyed Susans and mountain mints in there and wild bergamot that we do see in our own meadows. I often have to make concessions with clients. That's just how it is. That's the nature of landscape architecture. Next slide. This is my parents' house. So this is where it all began. I've been helping them do their landscape. Actually, tomorrow I gotta go weed. We have pokeberries that are out of control and they don't like them. And but this is what our landscape at home looks like. I'm kind of going for the informal, formal look. My mom likes the Better Homes and Gardens, kind of Williamsburg sort of look, but I'm insistent on putting native plants in there. So there's always a push-pull on that. But then she's also appreciating, she said, oh, there's butterflies and birds. And I said, yes, Mom, because you're planting native plants in there. So this is how you do that. And she said, well, I want more. And I said, well, I have no problem with that. Next slide. This is Eastern Minot High School's auditorium. So one of the first projects I did, actually the high school project I planned for this. And then they actually took the plan and implemented it. And I didn't know about it, but when I came back one time for a homecoming, I was like, oh my gosh, my garden, it was built. And so they took my ideas, and you can see I took pictures in the fall. So many times you see gardens in, spring and summer and all that. I said, I need to take pictures in fall and winter, because that's the time of the year most people don't take pictures of their landscapes and garden. So here you see it with the beauty berries and the goldenrods and all the trees in fall color. I mean, I think that's really an interesting time of the year to photograph, because you're taking pictures of things that are beautiful and in their own right in their own season. Next slide. So I did have a chance to do some redos for the Bridgewater College Eagles Nest area, which is basically like a snack bar area for the college. I've added some native plants like the creeping phlox there. The art department put in this really cool arbor, which I put a scarlet runner bean up it, so it was kind of neat. Scarlet runner beans are one of my favorite green beans. And there were already some bushes in there, like the pyrus, so I kind of landscaped around those. And then I added things like rosemary and lavender and thyme in some of the areas where there was like a microclimate, because all that concrete and glass and steel creates a lot of heat. So it creates a great place for the herbs to thrive. There's also winterberry hollies in there for some winter interest. Excellent. So here's Genesis's house. And I know we're kind of running up on time here. I'll try to get through the rest of them as quickly as I can.
Yeah, 4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay, thank you. I talk a lot, and that's just how I am, and I always need somebody to keep me on it. Thank you. So this is Genesis's house. The basic thing is what we did with her house. It was kind of boring. It was, envision half of the stuff gone. It was really the fence, some shrubs, and that's about it. And so we added things like blueberries and herbs, and you see black-eyed Susan, the rosemary, we added pawpaws and bee balms, and we even did a small herb garden, which you can't see, it's kind of around the corner to the house, to the right. There's also a little bog area where she's growing cranberries. So it's kind of a challenge in upstate South Carolina to grow cranberries because it's really, really hot. So we found a little microclimate under some of those oak trees in there. We made build a little bog and put the cranberries in there, and she's getting cranberries. So she actually harvests them for her food. She loves cooking and making food. So that's one thing we were trying to help her with that landscape. Next slide. This is in Stanton. Friend of mine contracted me to redo his front yard. So this is an example of in an urban area where you can do a lot in a very small space. So in that small space, there's daylilies, inkberry holly, mountain laurel. I'm trying to think what else is in there. Oh, Linton rose for some winter interest. There are some small winterberry hollies and a lot of different perennials like butterfly weed and black-eyed Susan and spiderwort. I think there's also some the wintergreen teaberry. You made teaberry gum. That's in there as well. So there's always something in there for him to look at each time of the year. Next slide. This friend of mine up the street, I redid her landscape. She's got all kinds of vegetables and fruits in the backyard. She's also doing what is called guild gardening. In other words, putting plants that have some sort of a symbiotic or good relationship together in a garden. So you have a tree, like a fruit tree as a centerpiece, and then fruit or nut bushes around it, and then like pollinator plants and plants that are beneficial and herbs too around that. So that's the idea of a guild garden. So that's in her backyard. She had this chain link fence. We put but that's the native honeysuckle, the coral trumpet honeysuckle, and we had grapevines and things like that to hide that fence. And that's her front. Those are all brown-eyed Susans. So it's much smaller flower than the black-eyed Susans, if you're wondering what a brown-eyed Susan is. Next slide. So I did have an opportunity to redo a elementary school's landscape. We did a lot of schoolyard gardens for the kids. We have a bog garden with pitcher plants and the fun carnivorous plants like sundew that trap the insects. And we can talk, if you're in a science class, that'd be a fun thing to talk about the insects, how they get in there, and then the plants eat them. And there you see some of them there, and some of the schoolyard gardening as well, where they take the fruits and vegetables and actually the people in the dining hall use it to make the food at the school. And next slide. This is a more recent project. This lady here wanted an edible landscape with native plants, so you can see there's a variety of native plants like the coreopsis there, mixed in with sunflowers, and that's comfrey and old-fashioned weigela, some hydrangeas, dill, fennel, dahlias. So again, oh, there's parsley in there and the mullein too, an ornamental mullein. So again, putting a lot of different things all in one garden. All right, next slide.
Okay, we have to cut it out and.
There you go. There's my last slide. So there's my information. There's the book. I have the book here if you would like it.
I'm gonna try that.
$35. So now I guess we're doing questions?
Yeah. You have these beautiful gardens
Yes.
and they're lovely. You don't have deer.
Oh, they're deer. Oh, yes, that's probably my most common question is, what do you do about deer? And unfortunately, they'll eat anything. That's the reality. The best thing to do is plant things together that they don't like. I actually have a theory called, just like Neon's theory, this is my theory of landscaping for deer. Not 100%, but it does some help. It's called BAT, bitter, aromatic, and thorny. So think about plants that are bitter to taste, aromatic, they smell, or have something thorny, like thorns or like a holly that has really prickly leaves. Planting those plants around very sensitive plants, let's say your lettuce or a dahlia or something they're gonna chew on, will deter them.
But thorny, for instance, would be roses, and they love roses and.
Yes, so it's not 100%.
And the natives, you know, the coneflowers, they used to leave them alone, but in the last couple of years, they also ate the coneflowers.
Yes, I use coneflowers for that purpose. Is the reason why people were using coneflowers for to deter deer was because they act as an antiseptic to their tongue. Their tongues will go numb when they eat the leaves of the coneflower.
But they eat them.
But yeah, but if you have them in such great quantity, there's not much you can do. I mean, because deer will be adapted. So this is not 100, like I said, 100%. The only way to really get rid of deer is one is get a dog, the other is to pick up hunting. I mean, let's be honest. I know some properties that have 40 deer on them. There's no way to stop that. And they'll eat they even eat hollies, they'll even eat red cedar. Like, I'm just shocked at the things that they're now eating. But it's just simply, there are no top predators anymore that control the deer population. And what we're doing by creating more of those edge type habitats, whether it's suburbia or, in the edges of farmlands, the problem is that's creating more deer habitat. So there's more deer because there's more habitat for them. They don't typically like fully enclosed forests as much, but if they have somewhat of an edge habitat, they'll follow that edge and then they'll be in your yard. Your yard is typically an open space, and that's inviting to deer, unfortunately. I know one thing that they may not be able to eat enough of would be mint. That stuff grows like a weed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What program did you use to create your renders of landscapes?
Oh, that's Real-Time Landscape Architect. So for everybody who wonders what my 3D modeling is that I use, it's Real-Time Landscape Architect. For me, I find it pretty easy to use. The steps, as somebody that I'm kind of a Luddite when it comes to some computer stuff because I'm a slow learner. For me, it's an easy way of developing a landscape plan because it takes me back to when I was a child. I used to play this computer game called SimCity. Some of you know that. And before it deviated into the focus of the people called The Sims, it was about creating communities, towns, villages, and landscapes and things like that. And that childhood thought pattern of working on that sort of came back to me when I was working on Real-Time Landscape. Because AutoCAD to me is very wonky. You can't get all the creativity. It doesn't offer things like, oh, I can plop in a street light here or a minivan here, or AutoCAD doesn't have like that cone flower you really wanted, in there. It's more of an architectural program. So as a landscape architect, yes, the house is important, the building is important, but my focus is on the outside, the trees, the grass, the patios and things. So the cool thing about that program also is with that picture you saw, you can have a plan view, which we'll do a little lesson on what that is. So plan view is if you're looking down on a landscape, this is like a circular sort of thing. Yeah, that one. So this would be considered a plan view, looking down on your garden as circles and squares and geometrical things. That is a perspective view. The picture of the 3D rendering, that's as if you're looking at it straight on, the landscape straight on, a prediction of the future. This is what it's going to look like. As if and I can even walk you through this, like I can do like a pattern trace around the garden, as if you're walking through this like in a video game. That's another cool feature. I find that program for people that have trouble with the computer, it's the easiest thing to learn. Because most people are not gonna pay $1,000 for an AutoCAD subscription. I mean, Photoshop is expensive as it is. But yeah,
Any more questions?
I know I talk a lot, that's just how.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh. Right, how much time do we have?
You got 10 minutes, folks.